anyway, Dr. Sines has a wealth of experience to share with us, and just like Allison was talking about, one of the things that'll get you really burned out really fast is not setting good boundaries. And not having good personal boundaries with the parents and the kids that we work with. So I feel like this is one of the most important sessions that we do. No pressure, Dr. Sines. But anyway, so be sure and ask a lot of questions and take good notes. All right, thank you.
Okay, yeah, and again, to reiterate, please feel free to go to the restroom or do whatever at any point, whenever. So I get that, you know, it's nighttime, but, you know, the bladder can only go so far. Along limited bladder, limited attention span. That's really engaging. Anyway, okay, well, we're talking about boundaries, and I want to present, the bulk of what we will do is talk about boundaries. But I think to understand what boundaries are and how they're most effectively implemented, we need to talk about the other, the yin to the yang of boundaries. So, in my opinion, the yin-yang in any effective relationship, the most balanced relationship is a relationship that has bridges and a relationship that has fences, okay? So boundaries are about fences. And in order to best understand fences, we need to understand a little bit about bridges, right? So we need both of them. And it's sort of like in a car, the bridges are the gas pedal and the boundaries are the brake. And I think our wisdom is the steering wheel, right, that tells us where to go. But without a gas pedal and without a brake, I wouldn't even want to get into a car because it's going to be a dangerous ride. And so, again, the main thing that we're going to talk about is brakes, but we also need to know a little bit about the gas pedal, about the acceleration, and that's building bridges. So one, the bridges are, I want you close to me, and the fences are, I want you close to me, but we're never supposed to be enmeshed. I still will be me and you still will be you, but let's see how much we can share, right? And that's the essence of a harmonious relationship. So with that in mind, let's talk about building bridges. Connecting is just, the essence of it is having an experience that's understood as being shared. So you and the child, the young man, the young woman that you will work with, the biological family, whoever the players are in that child's life, you will be connected with them. You will have an experience that's understood as being shared. You understand that you are sharing with each other the time and the energy and everything else. So that's great. So this is how we build bridges, by connecting. And so how do I do this? How do I actually build a bridge? This thing here is really important, so I'm going to camp out on the slide for a few minutes. There are a few truisms that come into play when we talk about connecting with another person. So my youngest son is a sophomore in high school. When he was in elementary school, he was a Lego fanatic. And what fascinated me about his Legos is that over the years and years and years that he bought Lego sets and then put them together and then destroyed them, and then all the pieces end up in bins, was that I knew that I could go to any Lego bin, reach in and pull out a piece of Lego, no matter what color, shape, size, go over to any other Lego bin, reach in, pick out a piece, and they would fit together, no matter what set they came from, no matter how different they were, because the designer, the engineer of that product said, hey, wouldn't it be great if all of these things were made to fit together, because in joining them, the builder could create a larger structure that transcends the meaning of any individual piece, right? And so to me, that's sort of the picture of our human experience, is that I believe we were all created by the same designer, and he made us to connect with each other, because in this connecting with each other, we have an experience that transcends our individual experience, right? It makes something more meaningful, as it were. So I think our deepest need is to know and to be known, this connection, right? Well, that's great. So we know that our souls need to be connected to be nourished and satisfied. So that's kind of the premise number one. Premise number two is we live incredibly busy lives. Well, I think actually the second premise is, after we know that we need to be connected, the second premise is we tend to connect with people who look like us, sound like us, act like us, behave like we do, right? And there's a very pragmatic evolutionary process. We learn to fear that which is different because it's a protective mechanism. So if you look different than me, I don't know if you're safe. And this goes back in our genetic history, millions and millions and millions of years. So if I don't know if you're safe, I'm going to pull back. And then once I get to know you, then I can come out and not feel threatened, right? So over all of these years and years and years and years and years and years, there's something deep inside of it that still holds to that self-protective mechanism. If you're different than me, I don't know if you're safe. And if I don't know if you're safe, you stay over there and I'll stay over here. And if you doubt that, ask yourself, when was the last time you heard of legislation being passed that didn't promote diversity but promoted homogeneity? Do we ever have laws where the government is saying, you know what, we're just too diverse, we mix up too much with each other, let's force ourselves to be more like each other, right? I mean, of course not, right? So we actually need laws to force us into this behavior of mixing with people who are different than us. Okay, so that's the second premise. Number one is I know I need my soul needs to be connected. Number two, I know that I'll connect most naturally with people who look like me, who sound like me, who act like me, who believe what I believe, who value what I value. Well, then the third premise is, oh, and by the way, I'm incredibly busy in this postmodern Western life that I live. So when you line those three premises up, what you end up with is the low-hanging fruit to nurture my soul is people that look like me. Right? So I'm busy, I know my soul needs to be connected, and I connect most readily with people who look like me, so that's how I nourish my soul. So people that nourish my soul are like me. And that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is, what if I need to connect with somebody who doesn't look like me, who doesn't act like me, who doesn't sound like me, who's a different age than me, different gender, whatever it might be, all the demographic variables are flipped. And I have to connect with them. And I'm not real good at that because it doesn't come naturally. Something deep inside me resists that, but I have to connect with them. And those are the kind of differences that you will face as you interact with other children who probably come from different socioeconomic and cultural and value backgrounds than you. So you have to connect with them. Well, what drives connection over differences is non-contingent communication. So contingent communication is communication that is contingent on a task or an activity. And that's the kind of communication we tend to do. It's like business communication. So did you send the email? Did you call your parent? It's all business communication. It's contingent on a task or an activity. Non-contingent communication is communication that is not contingent on a task or an activity. And it sounds like this. How was your weekend? Did you watch the game last night? I love your shoes, really cute, I want to get some, right? That kind of communication has nothing to do with a task, it's just I want to get to know you, right? That's the kind of language we tend to use with people that are most like us, right? Because it's comfortable and I can really get to know you. But people who aren't like us, we go to contingent communication. It's more superficial, it's more business management. So, to be connected, to build a bridge, building bridges is easy for people who are like me, but if they're different than me, I have to practice this non-contingent communication. Which means practically for you, when you're dealing with adults who look different than you and value different things than you do, or children, whomever it might be mindful to push yourself into non-contingent communication with that child, with that adult, with whomever it might be, and ask those questions, not the business sort of, did you do this, did you do that, did you hear from so-and-so? That's necessary, but it's not enough in itself. So remember, non-contingent communication, just asking questions about their life and how they're doing with no strings attached. That's how I build the bridge. Okay, so the question is, how well am I doing that with those who are most unlike me? So here's a great litmus test for any one individual at any stage in your life. If you're, for example, if you're young, how many old people do you really connect with? If you're Christian, how many non-Christians do you know? You know, if you're conservative, how many liberals do you know? If you're gay, how many straight people do you know? And so pattern your demographic reality, right, whoever you are, and then ask yourself, how many of my inner circle are different than that? And I wonder if I should add some spice into that. And if you end up with this really homogeneous core group, that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that, but it can pose some limitations in terms of you creating a bubble or a comfort zone that might make it difficult for you to reach out of that. So this is the operative question, is how well am I actually getting to know people that are most unlike me? Okay? So connecting is building a bridge. The takeaway, again, is that by nature, we're relational creatures and we have to build connections across differences for a relationship to survive. organic intimacy and authentic connection does not happen spontaneously, right? It's something we need to build with people who are different than us. So that's the accelerator, that's the gas pedal in a relationship, that's what drives it forward. And I'll come back to why the gas pedal is so important as we move in now to talking about the brake, the fences. So, protecting is about building a fence. So we talked about connecting there with bridges, now we're gonna protect with fences. What is protecting? It's about establishing what belongs to me, my possessions, my feelings, my thoughts, my body. So this thing that you're looking at called Adam Signs, I own it. And because I own it, I get to decide how it's treated, right? So it's just like my yard, where I live. I own the property, and legally, there's a limit to what is mine, and I could find a surveyor who will use GPS data points to tell me exactly what it is. But once we've established what is mine, then I put a fence around it, then I decide how it gets treated. If I want pink flamingos, then, you know, by God, we're gonna have pink flamingos, right? Until I get a letter from the homeowners association. But it's mine, and because it's mine, I decide how it gets treated, right? And that's true of ourselves, our whole being, okay? So protecting is just about establishing what's to me, what belongs to me, and how it will be treated. So let's talk about this, about rigid boundaries. So when we talk about, once we've identified, oh, okay, this is what belongs to me, let me go ahead and set a boundary around it so people will know what's mine, and once I've established what's mine, I can then determine how it needs to be treated. So I need to build boundaries. Well, how do I do that? It's sort of the Goldilocks, if I'm even remembering my fairy tales correctly. Isn't Goldilocks the one that was, the porridge was too warm? Okay, I'm on target here, right? Forgive me. So Goldilocks, you know, I don't know how the story goes, but essentially, you know, some of the porridge is too warm, some is too cold, and some is just right. One of the beds is too soft, one is too hard, and one is just right? So the same thing with boundaries. Once I establish what belongs to me, and I need to build fences or boundaries around it, there are three kinds of boundaries that people tend to put in place. Two of them are not functional. They tend to lead to dysfunction, and one is healthy. So let's talk about these three kinds of porridge, these three kinds of beds, and figure out what's right. So rigid boundaries. So when people think boundaries, often they tend to assume that a good boundary is a solid, firm, like that brick wall there, like this is it, right? And that's really not a good boundary. So rigid boundaries, people who establish those kinds of rigid boundaries, my way or the highway, this is the way it's gonna be, by God, you lead with an iron fist, they tend to do that because they're avoiding intimacy. That whole thing we just talked about, the gas pedal, and I wanna get to know you and connect. People that establish hard, rigid boundaries usually do so as a protective, an overprotective mechanism. They don't want people to get close to them, you know. It's a protective thing in a hyper-vigilant, fear-based way. They're unlikely to ask for help. People who establish very rigid, firm boundaries, they tend to be lone rangers. They don't know what interdependence looks like. They're unlikely to ask for help. They're overly protective of their personal information. They'll never tell you anything about anything. Very guarded, so to speak. They have few close relationships, and that's very important because when we start talking as mental health providers, you know, if you were to come into my clinic and I was to do an evaluation, if there was something wrong, I would do a battery, and you would take all these tests, and we would look at the data and figure out what symptoms you have, and then we would link those symptoms to different diagnoses like an anxiety disorder or depressive disorder, mood disorder, thought disorder, whatever it might be. So we're wanting to figure out what's wrong with you, but we also, just as important to that, is we want to figure out what's right with you, because we want to know what you're bringing to the table that can help you deal with the psychopathology, whatever the mental illness is. What are your resources available to you? And across the board, everyone agrees that the primary resource is relationships. So when somebody comes into the office and they're dealing with, the worst case scenario is somebody who has high pathology and low relationships. The best case scenario is somebody who has low pathology and high relationships, because their prognosis is very, very good in that scenario. So relationships are our primary resource. They're our primary asset in life. And if I'm building rigid boundaries, I'm locking myself out of having that precious resource that I need. So people who do these rigid boundaries, they're focused on, yes, but look at what I'm keeping out, and it comforts me to know that I'm keeping that stuff out. And there's truth to that, but they're also keeping out things that need to be in, like good, loving relationships. So we don't want rigid boundaries. That's the bed is too hard. Now let's look at the bed is too soft. These are porous boundaries, and these are really kind of wobbly, and they go everywhere. This person overshares personal information, right? And I travel a lot with my work, and I learned about 5 years ago when I sit in a plane and they ask they don't even ask what I do for a living because I have my earphones on before we even get to the tarmac. But I can't tell you how many times you're a psychologist, really. Well, let me ask you a question, and then my mother-in-law this, and people just start oversharing. It's I'm going la 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 la, I don't want to hear, I don't want to hear. So anyway, oversharing is a sign of bad boundaries, of porous boundaries. This is, on the one hand, it's good because this person may have good relationships. They're drawing in the relational piece of it. The problem with that is they're also drawing in dysfunctional and codependent type relationships. Difficulty saying no. They yes, I'll do it. Yes, I'll do it. Yes, I'll do it. Just love me. Just accept me. Just tell me I'm a good person. Just tell me you won't leave me. That kind of stuff. Over involved with other people's problems, dependent on the opinions of others, and they fear rejection. So this person is just, this radiates, I'm needy. I'm just this black hole of psychic energy, and I will suck you into my orbit and suffocate you and draw everything out of you, right? So the boundary, again, is very porous. I'll say that I don't want that, but I'm gonna cut a little hole down here just so you can get in, because I really do want you in. It's more important for you to be close to me than it is for you to be healthy with me. And so that's not good. So this is the bed is too soft. This person here, again, has no relationships. This person here has some good relationships and some toxic relationships. And so again, they're saying, oh, but I need to cut these holes in my boundaries so the good things can get in. And the good things get in, but then so do the bad things, right? So that's not what we want. These are good, healthy boundaries. Appropriately values. And the note here is I don't overvalue and I don't undervalue my own opinion. So I have my opinion, and it has value. It doesn't have any more value than your opinion, but it doesn't have any less. It has equal value. So because it has equal value, before I dismiss my own opinion, I need to consider facts. And because your opinion has value, and it's not any less important than mine, you are entitled to facts. And so there's this really great balance in that. I don't overvalue or don't over or undershare. It's that thing again where I'm not just going to, within 3 minutes, tell you about my dysfunctional relationship with my mother or anything like that. And then at the same token, if we've known each other for 9 months, it's not like you're still trying to figure out whether I even have a parent or anything like that, right? So it's this nice balance where it's not oversharing, it doesn't compromise values. So whatever I believe deeply and whatever is meaningful to me, if you disagree with it, if it offends you, then okay, I'm sorry, but this is just what I believe. Whether it's my religious ideology, my socioeconomic values, my political values, whatever it is, they belong to me. And because they belong to me, I shouldn't have to apologize for them. And then when you say no to me, when you say, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that, I don't guilt trip you, I don't shame you, I don't blame you. I say, okay, well, thank you very much for being honest with me, and then I move on. So I'm accepting of other people when they establish boundaries with me. I know my personal wants and needs and can communicate them, so I'm not, again, overly solicitous. I need. But at the same time, I'm not a martyr and just holding all my stuff in to try to be the heroine of something. And the last thing here is that, remember I said an appropriate boundary it's not set in stone and it doesn't have holes in it. But the little caveat is that it can be moved, right? So I'm going to set a boundary, and it's not going to have holes in it, and it's not going to have a gate in it, and it's not going to be made of stone, but it's going to be very clear and very easily demarcated. But if you come to me with compelling data that says, hey, Adam, this is why I really think you should rethink that boundary, and I think about it, and I say, you know what, you've got a good point, well, then it's very healthy for me to say, let's renegotiate the boundary, let's change the boundary, right? It's not an impulsive decision, I'm not doing it because I'm ashamed or I'm intimidated, I'm doing it because data is telling me that this new boundary is healthy. So it would be like, so I think I have my boundary and I'm gonna build my fence, and I build it, but then a survey company says, oh, hold on, we've got better technology now, and your boundary is actually over here. Oh, great, well, let me reset my boundary where it needs to be based on this new data. And that's very healthy. So those are the three kinds of fences we can build. You know, the brick one we don't want a brick one with holes in it. We want one that's clear, that's permeable, or that's clear, but that can be moved when it needs to be moved. Okay, does that make sense? All right. So, building a fence. This is why it's so important, because the deal, my guess is that, raise your hand if you're here because you have to be here for a class at university. Right?
I guess that's me. I'm an intern.
Okay, you're an intern. So you're sort of the outlier, right? So my guess is that it would be safe to say that you are in this room out of the goodness of your heart, right? It's just this altruistic thing that you're doing. Like, this is the right thing to do, and I want to make the world a better place, right? So that tells me that by definition, you are going to be more likely to be well, I don't need to go all the way back. You are going to be more likely at your core to be a bridge builder than you are to be a fence builder, right? So stated in some pejorative terms, you're just bleeding hearts, right? You're just bleeding hearts, and you think you're going to change the world, right? And I'm being tongue-in-cheek there. I mean, I'm not belittling what you do, but I'm saying that people that tend to go into mental health as a field, people like me, hopefully you have some compassion and empathy behind that, because you won't be very effective without it, right? So because you have compassion, because you have empathy and kindness in your heart, you're sitting in this room, and you are also probably going to be more fluid and natural at building bridges than you are at building fences. You're probably going to be more inclined to put the accelerator and dig into intimacy to build good relationships that way than you are to stop and say, wait, hold on. Let me just see if I should protect myself at any point. You're not thinking about protection, you're thinking about making a difference, right? And sometimes those things are mutually exclusive. So the reason this building a fence thing is so important for people who are kind-hearted is that there's this power cycle that goes on. And let me kind of explain what I mean by that. Illustration. I have 4 children. My girls are 19, and my boys are 17 and 16, thereabout, right? I know the boy's going to be a senior and the other one's going to be a sophomore, I know that, right? So anyway, when they were younger, the boys were younger, and the girls too, I love to hunt and fish, and the girls tried it and said, no thank you, right? I said, okay, that's fine. But the boys loved it, and I told them when they were in elementary school, I took them into my shop, and I said, look guys, these rods and reels over here on this side of the wall, that's my Walmart stuff. Those rods and reels on the back wall, that's my Academy stuff. And those rods and reels, I got those at Cabela's. So I said, here's the deal. You're young. You show me that you can be a good steward of the Walmart stuff. You show me that you can land a fish in salt water without dipping the thing in the water, and that you're not going to leave it outside, that you're not going to dig holes with it. And then once you show me you can steward that, then I'll let you use the Academy stuff, right? And you will find that you like the Academy stuff so much more because the reels are more fluid, you know, the action is better on the rods, and it's just more pleasurable to fish with it. And then I said, once you show me that you can be a good steward of the Academy stuff, you still can't have the Cabela stuff, that's mine. And once you can pay $500 for a rod and reel, then you get your own, and I won't ask you to borrow it, right? But the whole point of that is that value determines function, right? So the value of these rods and reels is low. So they can function as whatever. If they're going to be a sword in a sword fight, I'm not too worried about it. If they're going to be used as a shovel, I'm not too worried about it, because for $15 I can get a new one. But the Cabela stuff is high dollar, and because it's high dollar, it will function as a rod and reel, a proper rod and reel, and nothing else, right? And so that's sort of us, you know, in a nutshell. We are Legos, and we're high dollar Legos, every one of us, right? We were made to fit together, and we were made with incredible value. So the deal with boundaries, you know, and I can tell a lot. Like I've been a psychologist for 15, 20 years. I have a PhD in psychology and I have a doctorate of ministry in pastoral counseling. I'm ordained clergy, and man, I can tell a lot about a person in 3 minutes. I could probably diagnose you just based on your phone message. So I can fill people out. And one thing that immediately elevates my respect for a person is when I meet somebody that's good at setting boundaries. Not the brick wall boundaries and not the brick wall with holes in it, but good permeable boundaries as indicated, right? Because what that person tells me by setting good boundaries is that they recognize that they're Cabela's. They recognize that they're the high dollar Lego. They're not any more valuable than me, but they're not any less valuable than me. So what happens is that the way we set boundaries speaks to how we understand ourselves. Bridges as well, but certainly boundaries in the census. So the deal is that if I devalue myself, if I think, well, I'm the Walmart rod and reel, but you are the Cabela's, then I radiate this negative, insecure energy to everybody around me, right? And I just put it out there that, oh, I'm no good, I'm too black, I'm too white, I'm too brown, I'm too skinny, I'm too fat, I'm too rich, I'm too poor, whatever it is, you find your variable to be insecure about and you camp out on it, right? And you're radiating that, and people pick up on that. So you're radiating this energy that says, I don't like myself, I'm uncomfortable with myself, I'm less than. And then it comes time to build a fence, right? And you have to kind of lay down the law. And then so how do you set your boundaries? You say, well, is there any way you could possibly think about not calling me a bitch all the time? And if it bothers you, hey, no problem, right? And so you set these really lame boundaries. Then people look at you like, oh, no, I'll call you what I want to call you. And then you look at their behavior and you say, see, when I set boundaries, nobody respects them. That just reinforces my working thesis that I have no value. Because we tend to look in life for data that reinforces what we already believe, right? So there it is, it's out there. So there's this power cycle going on that says I have none, and then I radiate that energy to the world saying, please treat me as somebody with no power, as evidenced by your refusal to respect the boundary that I set. That's no good. So then the other cycle is, I'm not any more valuable than you, but I'm not any less valuable than you. And we all have tremendous value. So the deal is this. I'm going to set a boundary. I'm going to set a boundary, and I expect you to respect my boundary. Now, here's the second deal. When I set the boundary, you're probably going to push it to see if I'm serious. Because for people that grow up in chaos, when you set a boundary with them, the first thing they will do is push it to see if you're for real, right? And so a lot of times it's just sort of an aside when we do behavioral psychology, and so the parent is saying, oh, my kid does this, this, and this, or just this one thing. And we say, well, here's the intervention. When he does this, you do this. You either give him sort of a carrot or a stick kind of a thing, and that will decrease the behavior. And then, but what happens in fact is when you do that, when you put the carrot or the stick out there, the behavior gets worse, right? Because the kid is saying, wait, you've changed homeostasis, you've changed what's normal, right? And so you're trying, oh, I can see it now, you're trying to get me to not to do this thing. Well, let me up my game and do it more and faster and harder than I've ever done it. And then if I can do that, maybe I'll back you down. And if I can back you down, then we've really established who's in control in this relationship, right? So it's called the extinction burst. So behavior always does that before it diminishes, right? And what happens, sadly, is that I work a lot with schools and with teachers and with parents, is the kids acting out and we put an intervention in place and they try it for a week or two and the behavior goes through the roof and they say, oh my gosh. I say, how's it going? It's horrible. I started it and man, he went off the hook. It was crazy, and so that wasn't the right thing to do, and so I stopped. I say, oh no, you're screwed now, man. You just told the kid who's in control. That was a sign that you were on the right track, right? So when we set boundaries, we can immediately expect the behavior to increase because the person is wanting to know, are you serious about that? And then if you value yourself, you say, no, really, I'm serious, I value myself, and so this is, so they come back and they push on it. And this isn't where we say, well, hold on, good boundaries are permeable. Okay, they're pushing. Let me bring it in. No. That's not the data that we're looking for to reestablish the boundary. That just says, no, stay where you're at. Hold the boundary, right? So that's the power cycle. And then ultimately I say, see, when I set boundaries, people respect them. And they respect them because I have value. And so the power cycle goes the other way. So setting boundaries, this thing about building fences, for people who are bleeding hearts, like everybody in this room, that are in social work when we could be getting finance degrees and making tons of money, right? But we've chosen to save the world with our nonprofits and mental health degrees, for crying out loud, right? This is turning into my therapy now, forgive me, I'm venting, right? Sorry. Boundaries are so important, right? Because this is really where we say, no, we're serious about this, right? So that's why it's so important to know how to build fences. So what needs protection, right? We're saying, well, okay, we get it. We need to have these certain kind of boundaries in place, and they need to look a certain way. And the reason it's important is because it communicates to the people around me what I think about myself and whether I'm to be respected, not whether I care about them, but whether I'm to be respected. So here's what needs protection: our bodies, our thoughts, our emotions, our material resources, and our immaterial resources. So let me just kind of talk through how these things will get played out. And this is based on 3 data points, the 3 wells of experience that I've drawn from. Number 1 is my clinical background, right? PhD in psychology, worked with kids in schools and hospitals, nonprofits everywhere. That's my first experience with working with kids in this. My second experience in working with kids in this situation is, I told you I have 2 girls, they're 19. One is my biological daughter and one is an adopted daughter. And we adopted her here in Bryan, and she had a casa right here, that worked with her. And so walking through that for our family was a process of me understanding the dynamic not from the psychology chair, but from the adopted parent chair, right? And being in a different role. And then the third well of information that I have to draw from in speaking to this is that I grew up in substitute care. So CPS was never involved with my family, but I was a kind of a punky kid. And so my mom relinquished parental rights, and I went to go live with a family that raised me, right? And so there's tremendous insecurity associated with that kind of structural change for a child, right? Regardless, even in the lower end of trauma, right? When you have an experience of severe trauma, but there are so many questions that come up for a kid that's not living with their biological parent. Is there something wrong with me? I'm less than, whatever it might be, and that leads to attachment issues. And attachment issues are just, the smell of attachment is insecurity and fear. You're just not sure ever where you stand, and you're not sure ever that any relationship will be permanent, right? You just always are waiting for the thing to erode and dissolve, right? So those are, when I'm speaking to these areas, I'm speaking from those as well as my clinical experience, my experience as an adoptive father, and then my own experience living with a family that wasn't my family. So what needs protection? Our bodies, right? And here and with these boundaries, it's 2 ways. You're thinking, what are my boundaries? And then what boundaries should the child have, even if they don't have them? So you need to ask yourself, how much touch are you comfortable with, right? Are you comfortable, and you need, with yourself and with your peers, to be asking what's appropriate. Which child can sit on my lap in which setting and under what circumstances, if ever, right? When is it okay to do that to a kid and say, good job, it was really good to see you? When is a handshake okay? When is a hug okay? Is it okay for me to ask for a hug? If a child asks for a hug, what do I do with that? All of those answers inform what our boundaries look like. That's us setting the post holes for our fences, right? And so we need to be thinking through that. Yes, ma'am, please.
So for children who've been abused, they would probably have a different tolerance for hugging.
Probably, yeah.
And so, do we just let the child take the lead on that?
I would just sit down with a child, regardless of their age, whether they're 2, even younger than 2, all the way through 21, and say something very simple like, people are different about how they like hugs and whether they like to be touched. And some people really like hugs and some people just don't like them. So what feels good to you? Do you like handshakes? Do you like hugs? Or do you just like to say hi from over there? You just tell me what you'd like and we'll go with that, right? And then if they say, oh, I like to sit in your lap and I want to snuggle, and it feels really weird, you know, they might, you know, then you say, well, great, okay, it's good that you like to be close because it's good to feel physical touch and hug, but let's start with handshakes, right? Let's just start with handshakes, right? Or let's start with a high five and then a quick side hug, you know? And then that's where the psychoeducation comes in, and you teach the child that touch comes on a continuum, right? And the touch that might have been meaningful to you in your home maybe was not appropriate, or maybe it was, it depends, but we can back all the way up to just a high five, and we can just enter there, right? So you might need to help them understand the language they need to set their own boundaries, right? So it's not just about us setting boundaries, it is, but it's also about us looking at the child and saying, well, what boundaries don't they have, and how can I give them language to begin to construct them and to understand themselves well enough to know what people should and shouldn't do. So number one is your bodies, and when we think about bodies, well, I'll come back to that. Yeah, so that's our bodies. We need to know what we can tolerate, and we need to know what other children can tolerate. And I'll tell you what, you know, there are a lot of people in mental health that, like me, that entered into the field because they're trying to resolve their own past, right? I'm a case study for that right here in this chair. So if you came from some kind of background where physical touch was a weird thing, don't use that kid to resolve your own stuff. Don't think, I never got hugs as a kid, so I'm gonna give this kid a hug. That's perverted, that's abusive, that's you using the child to meet your own need, and it's not about you, it's about the kid. So you need to put all that stuff away, and you talk to your therapist about that, and whatever, right? But you're not using that relationship to have your own needs met, okay? So that's number one. Number two is our thoughts or ideas. What do you believe about whatever it might be? So let me just give you a hypothetical. Let's say the child that you're working with is a 13-year-old Latino male from a low socioeconomic home, and you are a 23-year-old Caucasian female from an upper middle class background, right? And that person says, I got stuck with another white bitch, and just puts it out there like that, another white bitch. I know y'all white chicks, man, how y'all are, and the way y'all act, and just start slandering you. You do not have to apologize for your white self, right? And for what you think and for what you believe, right? It's not a crime to be white or female or blonde hair or blue-eyed. Or if you're an African-American 21-year-old female or male working with a young little white girl with blonde hair and blue eyes, and she says, don't touch me, you're black and I know you're dirty, right? Whatever it could be, right? And you're gonna hear it all. You have the right to say, thank you for sharing how you feel, but I need you to know that it's hurtful to me when you talk about me that way. I hope you'll get to know me and know that I may be white, I may be a girl, I may have blonde hair and blue eyes, and you may have been hurt by people that look like me, but I'm different, and I'm here to be your friend, right? So you set a boundary around that. Don't tolerate people treating you that way, any kids or anything like that. It's absolutely appropriate for you to own your thoughts and your ideas, right? And then the thing goes both ways, though. You know, I'm using some very obvious crass examples just to illustrate the point, so forgive me, but we're not going to go in and say, well, hopefully one day your family will be off welfare and you can make your own money at a real job, you know? We're not going there. You know, we've got to help them understand that they shouldn't have to apologize for their narrative and their story and where they are in life. That's about having boundaries around our thoughts and ideas. Our emotions, whatever you feel, if you feel sad and you feel like crying, that's fine. You know, if you can do that in an appropriate way, you shouldn't have to apologize. That child should not have to apologize. You know, we were, when Maya came into our family, she was very sad about the finality of it. You know, you would think, hey, good for you, Maya, you got this family adopting you, and hey, he's a psychologist, and you know, and her biological dad was Latino, and her biological mom was white, and I'm Latino, and my wife is white. It was like sort of a match made in heaven, right? And she came in and she was really, really sad because, oh, this means I'm really never going back to my parents, right? Even though they had been saying that all along, and she knew it in parental rights have long since been termed, oh, this means I'm never going to go back. And we don't go in and say, you shouldn't feel sad, you should feel grateful that you have a family that finally stepped up and took, I mean, but that kind of stuff happens, right? As blatantly or as subtly as it can come across. So we don't have to apologize for our emotions, and neither should the children or the parents or whatever that parent. If that parent, biological parent, looks at you and calls you the devil, right? They're entitled to that feeling. However inappropriate or inaccurate, maybe that's what they feel. That's fine, that's fine. Our material resources, the main things here are your money, right? Because the thing with attachment is, have you ever watched Hoarders on Netflix, or, people that just pack crap up in their, and what that is about is, there's a void in my heart that's supposed to be filled by people because we're Legos, right? But for whatever reason, I'm not connecting with other Legos because I'm afraid of them, because they won't do what I say, because I'm warped in my own way, whatever it might be. So let me get things. Things are so easy, and I can have as many as I want, and I can control them, and they'll do what I say, and they're predictable, yada, yada. So they start stuffing, right, as it were. So when we have these attachment issues and we're afraid that things are going to be taken away, like you said, you care about me, and I might believe that, but hey, let's face it, you're not going to be around for the rest of my life, so what do you have that I can keep? How much money do you have that I can keep? What presents can you give me that I can keep? And it's just like this grab for the material things that you can offer me. So I don't know what the CASA policy is on gifts and all that. Certainly follow that. And to whatever degree you have wiggle room, remember that, you shouldn't feel, that if you feel that somebody's just coming in and wanting to do that with you, trust that sense in yourself and say, what you get is my time today. What you get is my energy. You get my eyes to see you, you get my ears to hear you, and you get my body to give you a high five. That's what you get. But no, we're not going to the dollar store. It's just not going to happen, right? So, material resources, and then the immaterial resources, this goes back to our bodies, Your immaterial resources, apart from your money, it's your life force, it's your energy, it's your time, right? And that this is where, it could just, because again, we're all bleeding hearts, right? And we want to change the world. And that's wonderful, it's beautiful. Thank God for people like us, honestly. The challenge, though, is that it can become a tar baby, it can become a black hole, and you can get sucked into it. And for whatever it's worth, I'm 50-something, 52, I think, years old, and I've been in this field since '94. When I got my first gig as a case manager working for the Bear Foundation, a foster placement agency. That's when I started in the field. And man, I figured out too late that I could work 70-hour days, 70-hour weeks. I could literally not be married and say, I'm going to devote my life to doing whatever and live on caffeine and 4 hours of sleep, by God, right? And I wouldn't, I just don't know how much more effective I would be than I am right now, right? So the point is that we need to set boundaries around our resources. And when we start feeling like it's time to say when, then it's time to say when, and say, the kid says, can you come over? I know you're supposed to come over next week, but I want you to come now and next week. Oh, thank you. It means so much that I'm special enough for you that you want to see me again. I'm so sorry, though. I can't do that. I've got other things, and it's okay to say, my body's tired and I need to take care of my body right now. That's my priority, so that when I do see you, I'll be ready to give you my eyes and my ears, right? And they may, oh, you suck, you don't even care about me, you don't love me, whatever. They may give you all that, but it's about knowing how to let that stuff be deflected, okay? So that's what needs protection, is all those things right there. How do I protect? Name your limit, practice clear, respectful communication, and seek support. So you decide what your limit is. In the case of my house, the physical property, I have GPS data points that tell me what my limit is. But you decide what kind of language you can tolerate. You decide how much of your energy you can give. You decide how much of your time you can give, how much of your money you can give. You decide what your limit is. And then when that limit gets tapped, you practice clear, respectful communication. A great disarming way to tell somebody no is to make an I statement. And an I statement is, I feel blank about blank because blank. I feel blank about blank because blank. So let's say they're saying, I want you to come over again because I know I'm gonna see you in a week, but I wanna see you now, right? And you say, instead of saying, just no, sorry, I can't, or well, let's just go ahead and wait, you just say, I feel so sad about not being able to come to see you right now because I can tell that you really like being with me. That's so valuable to me. But I really can't because I have to take care of my body. And you're saying, you're not saying you ask too much of me. You're not saying you don't understand what this relationship is supposed to be about. You're not perjuring anyone. You're not shame producing. You're just saying, oh, I'm sorry, this is where I'm at. I feel blank about blank because blank. And that's the kindest way to set a boundary with somebody. Again, you set the boundary, the first thing you can expect is they're gonna start pushing on it to see if you really, really mean it. And then sometimes you have to use more clear and direct communication. But we're gonna start off being clear and respectful. And then when they keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing, seek support. So ask for, there's a time and a place to ask a supervisor, you know, and you say, I've been really trying to be clear with this child, they're X, Y, and Z. Can you think of other ways I can communicate this message to them? Or to the parent, or to whomever else might be able to help the child, get the child to understand what's going on. Okay? So the takeaway is that self-protection is a basic human instinct, and we've got to be able to set boundaries. If we don't set boundaries, we will not be sustainable in any way that's life-giving. We will be sustained in dysfunction and eventually toxicity and a way of relating that's just not adaptive. We just turn into weird caricatures of ourselves that are really unfortunate because we couldn't build a fence, and we thought that all a relationship really needs is a bridge. You know, let's just love and hold hands and sing Kumbaya, and everything will be fine. And it just doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work that way. So if you feel resentful and taken for granted, that's a check engine light that says fence, 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 fence. If you have poor conflict resolution skills, that means that you're gonna suck at building fences, that you're not gonna, when it comes to actually establishing what's yours and how you protect it, you're gonna say, oh, but I don't want my neighbor to get mad at me, if they don't like me, then it's not gonna be cool, you know, and it's just not, it's not good. And people, you know, some people think that, that others resent people who set boundaries, but others respect, healthy people respect people who can set boundaries, right? The two questions that every kid is going to ask you through their behavior, number one is, do you care about me? And number two is, can I make the rules in this relationship? And that's essentially any two questions that any two people ever ask in a friendship or in a marriage or whatever it is. Do you care about me and can I be in control? And the answer is yes and no, right? Yes and no. The bridges tell you that I care about you, and the fences tell you that you're not going to be in control. Okay. I think that's the last slide. Let's see what we got. Boom, that's the last slide. What can I clarify for anyone? What questions do you have about any of this material about fences or bridges?
Oh, come on. Are you all feeling very confident in your ability? I have one thing.
Yep.
How would you say it differs with the adults that we're working with the biological parents, and even foster parents that we're working with in setting those boundaries? Is there any difference?
No, the general ideas are the same. I would say that what would be different would be, and I'm not being mean when I say this, but if a parent, you have to figure, if a parent has been so unsuccessful in the task of parenting that a state agency has had to come in and usurp the job, then we can rest assured that that parent is developmentally delayed in some capacity, right? So at some level, they're probably still locked up in their old childhood or in their pain, right? So the language that you use between a child and a biological parent will be a little bit different. So with the parent, it'll be a little more sophisticated, but not much. You know, not much, because a lot of these parents that they feel like 16 or 17-year-olds, you know, even when they're in their 30s, they still feel like developmentally they never got past 10th or 11th grade, right? Regardless of what their educational attainment was. So that's one difference, is there's language. And then with foster parents, you have a small percentage of foster parents that are in it for the wrong reason, and, you know, they're acting out of their own pain. But for the most part, you have really, really sweet people that are just doing something that they don't have to do, and they're doing it because they love kids, and they really want to make the world a better place. And you can have probably more rational, predictable conversations with them than you can with children or with the biological parents. So I would say that's the main difference, is that your audience will be different, but the principles will be the same. Yes, please.
I often find my boundaries by encountering them and realizing, no, I don't like that. Like I teach and someone, a student tries to hug me, I'm like, oh wait, I don't feel comfortable with this. Is there a way to figure out what those boundaries are before they happen, to kind of look at situations?
Some of them are givens, you know, so touch, if you touch a sexual body part, it's not whether it feels good or bad, it's just, nope, we don't do it, right? And so, money, can you give me $2,000? Nope, even if I had it, I wouldn't give it, right? It's an obvious rule out. But the rest of it, I think, is pretty subjective, and I used to watch, when I was in college, my roommates would watch Star Trek: The Next Generation, right? And the guys would always rag on Counselor Troy, you know, and they were like, oh man, everything she says starts with, I sense that, blah, 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 blah. You know, that's such crap, you know? And I was getting a degree in English, of all things, right? And going into a master's in counseling, and so I was like secretly like saying, y'all suck, man, she's cool, you know? But anyway, that's it. That's where we learn our boundaries, is we pay attention to our feelings and our emotions, you know? And if it doesn't feel right, don't talk yourself out of it not feeling right. Just say, it doesn't feel right, I need to attend to that. You know, I think that's really where it comes from. And then it becomes a data informed. It starts with a feeling and then you add data to it. So it feels weird when blah, 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 blah. So then you say, well, let me set a boundary around that. And then let me talk to somebody and say, you know, this thing happened and it felt weird. I think I'm going to do this. Does that seem reasonable? Oh gosh, you're being hypervigilant. You're being paranoid. I don't think so. Or, no, that seems reasonable. You know, so then you have actual data and rationale to establish whether the boundary is appropriate or not. But it starts with feeling, I think, fairly subjectively. Yeah. Yes, please.
I have a question for both you and Kate. I guess we've talked a little bit before about not necessarily wanting to be alone with the children whenever